Hi, welcome to the Cinematography Salon podcast, a show about celebrating cinematography and inspiring both the current and next generation of visual artists, exploring the latest trends, techniques, technologies, and culture, and featuring exclusive interviews with some of the most talented and innovative cinematographers working today.
Hi, everyone. So here today with me, I have Oren Sofer, and we have a wonderful guest, Olan Collardy. Olan is a UK-based cinematographer, and Olan has actually come on the previous version of the show on the Instagram, so we're super excited to have him back. Olan has a breathtaking body of commercial and narrative work. Credits include his recent debut feature, Rye Lane, directed by Rain Allen Miller, as well as a variety of commercial work for really impressive clients. I've been following Olan for years, and one thing that I find really inspiring about Olan's work and his efforts as a cinematographer is how he really demystifies some of the techniques surrounding some of these higher-end jobs and these bigger sets, and he really democratizes his process and allows people to see behind the curtain and understand the way that he creates the images that he creates. It's always clear to me when I look at his work that I can see this refinement, years of experience in testing and experimenting and fine-tuning the image. So we're really excited to dig into some of that today, get into some of the specific projects, and also talk about his features. So, Olan, I wanted to start by asking you a little bit about this precedent that I feel like you've set by making information like your camera tests available and how those tests and experiments have fed your own work.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Aaron, for having me on. Really appreciate bringing me onto this platform. With regards to the test and just, you said, demystifying the process, I did not go to film school. I did go to university to study something else. Again, it's a very long story, which I'll probably go into at some other day. 10, 11 years ago, I think 2011, 2012, I stumbled across a camera, a digital camera, which I think it's known as the 550D here in the UK. I think it was called a Rebel T2i or something in the States.
T2i. Yeah, that was the camera I started out on. Yeah. That was my first video camera.
Yeah, so I picked that up, and I think for me that was that gateway drug into what I guess I do now. And because I didn't go to film school, I had no network or no colleagues, no friends, no community who understood what the art and craft of cinematography was. So I had to self-educate. And it was something that became a passion / obsession. My day was just, going to work. I had a day job then. And during my lunchtime or any spare time or in the downtime I had was just scrolling through the web where there was like f-stoppers or Facebook forums or, YouTube tutorials on how to make it work better. And I think, there were some people back then who were very generous with information. I think a lot of us, careers to Philip Bloom. I know he gets a lot of stick nowadays. I remember, just going to philipbloom.net, I think it was, just reading camera reviews. And there was, Shane Hurlbert had a blog then called the Hurl blog. And I think for me, those sites were just where I would say I saw the curtain being opened. And more specifically, Shane Hurlbert's stuff. I remember he did this bounce light test, which was him bouncing a tungsten light into a polyboard, and on the return, just having something like a bed sheet or shower curtains. And I still remember just seeing how soft the light was on the talent's face. And, things like that for me was how I understood how to, I guess, use lighting, because at the end of the day, cameras are cameras. What makes things interesting is what's in front of the camera, including, the light. And when I then started experimenting with shooting and imagery, one thing that was important to me was to, again, democratize that information the same way I wouldn't be here if Philip Blooms and the Shane Elvis and whoever out there, who shared information. If they never did that, I wouldn't be here and have the information I have at the moment. So for me, it was, first and foremost, it was that. Second of all, there is a philosophy that I generally believe in, that when you educate others, you educate yourself, right? because in teaching others, it forces you to interrogate what your process was. So if someone asks you, why did you use that particular lamp on that shot? Perhaps when you did it, it might have been subconscious, it might have been reflex, it might have been out of habit. But if someone asks you that, it's not good enough for you to just say, hey, I just did it. And I think it forces you to go, oh, well, what did I like about that light? Why did I put it at that angle or that? So I think for me, sharing information was also a way for me to learn and almost in third person, learn from myself. For me, it's very important to share that process and just, largely help others, but also helping myself by cementing my process.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I spent a couple of years teaching at NYU early on. That was sort of my side gig when I was still building up cinematography jobs that I could sustain from financially. So I taught like a freshman year fundamentals of cinematography course, very basic stuff. But it was so helpful to teach because you learn from teaching and you learn so much just from the repetition of it. So this is really cool. I want to take you back to the earlier days when you're starting to conceive of these tests. I imagine that early on, especially, as you're learning from Philip Bloom and you're learning from Shane Hurlbut and from YouTube and other online resources, something I see a lot is I'm assuming that the first thing you want to start doing is learning how to replicate the things that they're doing.
Yeah.
And now I'm curious, how did you then sort of transition into like, okay, I think I now have a good grasp of these fundamental concepts. Now I want to sort of try to find my own approach to things and my own ideas and my own things to test. Like, was there a moment where it sort of switched over and you started thinking outside of the box of just replicating what these websites were saying? Because I think that's what really ends up elevating somebody into like the career that you're able to create for yourself, right? Is you're able to kind of deviate from the formulas and come up with your own approach to things. So yeah, talk us through that sort of transition for you.
Yeah, no, that's a good question because you're right. When you start to replicate, you try and copy someone else's work, and in doing that, you find your voice or you find a new route. Also, just to give you some context, yes, I did want to practice while I was learning. Also, like I said, I didn't go to film school. I don't know anyone who works in film. No one in my family works in film. I didn't know anyone who went to film school. I was just like a guy wandering around in the wilderness. So for me, these camera tests, one, yes, was to learn and to replicate. Two, it was a way to put myself in the room and more so be able to showcase that work. I have a couple of friends who I would bribe or just tell them, hey, can you stand in front of the camera so I can do some stuff with it? And, in as much I was looking at, okay, maybe Philip Bloom is not the right example here. Maybe Shane Hurlbut, because, he's 0% dog fan lights and does all these wonderful things.
Right.
I mean, I didn't have the 2K. I didn't have the 10K. I didn't have, a whole grip equipment. I didn't have the textiles. I didn't have the 4x4 frame. Yeah, I had a day job that gave me some, disposable income, but I didn't have the tools that, Shane had on his set. So the physics of light are the same. Like, I would have a source. I remember one of my first lamps was this Aperture 120T. I don't know if they make them anymore. I will take it and put it on a boom stand. Because, what I've learned is, the closer you get your light source to your talent or to your subject, the softer it is. I think my obsession for soft light, comes from Shane. Shane is a soft light guy. So to get it super soft, I knew how to put it on a boom. So I bought this boom stand, and that was my way to get the light as close to the talent as possible without seeing the stand in shot. Then, I'd look at the frame, and in as much as you've got like a soft light in a China ball or gem ball close to your talent, still wasn't as soft as I would see in these test references, largely because he was using bounce light. I didn't have a 10K to bounce into a polyboard. I was only one man, right? So the quickest thing I did is put this gem ball on a boom stand, put it to the talent, and like, this still isn't soft enough. So I'm like, okay, what diffusion material can I have? I've heard about muslin and all these stuff. So I've been wrapped in muslin around this ball, and I'm like, okay, cool. That looks kind of like soft. And then it was just this iteration of very lo-fi DIY approach that I had then. I would say I still have now. And I think someone once said this to me and I took it kind of the wrong way then. Well, I've learned to embrace it. I mean, I think they meant as a compliment. When I look at your work, there's something very DIY about it, kind of like you're making it up as you go along. And they found it really charming. And in my head, I'm like,
Yes.
shit, like I thought it was legit. How I'll work with some gaffers sometimes, they'll have a chimera with grids on, and I'll be like, oh, can you just throw like a muslin on that stuff? And they'll be like, what? There's already a diffusion in that thing. Do you want me to take off the grid and put the muslin on, then I'm like, no. Leave the grid on, just suck it up.
Yeah. And put the muslin on top of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I haven't done a test to see if the muslin was behind or in front, what the difference is. But for me, it was just an evolution of me 6-7 years ago, messing about with these techniques. And over time, it became this unique look. And, I was very self-conscious about my work in the sense that my work didn't look like other people's work. Which, now you think, oh, man, you should be happy that your work doesn't look like other people's work. But then
Exactly. Yeah.
my work looks, I couldn't explain it, but I could tell my image from someone else's image. And why come my stuff can't look like that? Because if I could get myself to look like that, then I'll get signed. Then all these people would offer me jobs. But I just could not. I just couldn't do it. And that's because the tools I was using were, I guess, I was just, like I said, I was making it up as I went along. And, it took me a while to see that it's actually a superpower, having your work be different and unique from others. And, I've learned to not be self-conscious about it, that someone might look at the work and be like, okay, this guy, what is this? And now it's something that I embrace. So it was an evolution of, what I was seeing, and I couldn't exactly replicate it, but in doing a bad job of replicating that using lo-fi tools, I eventually stumbled across this weird look I've got going on.
I think that's really inspiring, actually. And just a quick follow-up on that, because I think people might be very interested in this approach to testing and finding a look. Logistically, where were you doing these tests?
Good question. I had a friend of mine called Dumas. I love him so much. And, I credit my taste and my influences largely to him. He's a wonderful director. He had a space like a studio space in Hackney, in London. And even this was before we started working together. It was just a guy who loved what I was doing. And he's like, whenever you want to use my space, come down. So I'll go down to his studio. This was like 2015, 16. I go to his studio and he would just sit there and just watch, or just help me set up stands and to do what I wanted to do. And I think for me, I really value those days where I could just get up, speak to maybe a friend who was free, and then I will go to Dumas's studio and I will set up a scene, a mise-en-scene, and just shoot. And I think what influenced that was when I would shoot with my cameras, most especially the T2i or the 550D, and I go into this like endless vicious cycle of buying kit. So like everyone bought the Nifty 50 because you saw a guy on YouTube shoot the Nifty 50 and it looked dope. And then you go buy that lens and you shoot on it and you're like, this looks shit, it doesn't look like film. Then you go and read the YouTube thing again, you realize, okay, they use some lights. Then you buy some lights. It still looks shit. Like, oh, that's because they use the Fusion. Okay, use the Fusion. Still shit. You realize, oh, they are color grading stuff. Then you start messing about with Magic Bullet, Mojo, and all this stuff. It still looks shit. Then you ask yourself, what actually makes an image cinematic? I know that word gets thrown about a lot. And then I realized it's nothing to do with what you can't see. It's what you can see if you have a unique face in front of the camera with a unique background and they are in some unique clothes. Now you're talking. So it's for me, it was about how can I create a scene that does 80% of the work, and then I'll throw some lighting in space. Then things start looking like a movie. When I unlocked that information, that's when I would say the gap between my abilities and my ambition started to close up, because I realized I could go to Jim Master's studio, take one of his flats, put like a wallpaper, like a wood paneled wallpaper or some pink wallpaper or whatever, get my muse or whoever's standing from the camera to wear a particular costume, and then things start looking like a film. And then I realized some of these people who were coming from the camera were also actors. So to make it work there well, I'm like, hey, I'm going to shoot a monologue so that, you scratch my back, you stood there for like two hours, me doing my stuff. Hey, you say a couple of things, I'll go home, I'll cut it up, and then you leave with like a reel, like something that looks like a still from a movie. And I remember about, I think 2016, someone left a comment on my Instagram saying, oh, where can I watch these short films? Are these actual films, or are these just like, and I was, oh shit, I've been caught out. And that's just because for me, these setups were a way for me to understand what goes into visual storytelling, wardrobe, makeup, faces, background. And for me, every time I go on a job, and knowing as it might be, I'm the guy who's trying to work with the director to create the right color palette, have the textures in the scene, because that's how you make interesting imagery. It's very little to do with the cameras. Somewhat very little to do with the light, because the mise-en-scene also informs the light. And a part of me kind of misses just being able to go into a space and just light, because now I overthink stuff. I'm like, if I'm going to test some stuff, I should be shooting on a nice camera. So, sometimes I'm fortunate enough to speak to guys at Panavision, and who are happy for me to come in and play about with some camera and some lenses. But then it comes to lights. I mean, Panavision is a camera company, so I have to start bringing the very few lights I have, which is like this aperture I've got for 5-6 years, and start bringing C-stands. So I really love doing that, because it's a place for me to, just remember where I started, and also just play with some things. But again, because I don't have that many lights, there's very little I can test and play with.
So interesting. Yeah, it's really super inspiring hearing you talk about this. I feel like what you just explained probably answered Oren's question, or at least in my opinion, this idea that like the way that you diverge from these other people was by bringing in these elements of helping actors with monologues and thinking about wallpaper and thinking about mise-en-scene. Like that's what I feel like really makes your test so cinematic and so relatable, and probably, great to send to directors and stuff, because they see like kind of your eye and everything. One of your favorite tests of mine is the hard lighting test, because I feel like hard lighting is one of those things that a lot of DPs coming up are like, how the hell do I make hard light look good? And I love that you tackled that in a test and shared it. It's like super cool. But yeah, I can imagine like coming onto a show and like having people talk about your test. It's like obviously your work is the thing that is really the best part about, your craft. And I feel like it's Oren and I, and I'm sure so many others who know your work, understand how sophisticated it is. So I really want to jump into that, talk about especially some of your recent stuff, which is jaw-droppingly beautiful. But before we do that, I did want to touch briefly on this mentorship thing, because this show is really about exactly what you said, educating others in order to educate ourselves. And I think that our guests in many ways are sort of a conduit for us to educate the cinematography community, and in turn sort of educate ourselves as we, continue in our careers and everything. So I just love how well you put that. And I noticed on your site recently that you have this section about mentorship and shadowing, and I just find that to be so compelling. And I wanted to hear a little bit about what made you choose to set that up and what your experience has been with it so far, if it's a new thing, if you're still figuring it out, or if you've had experiences with people shadowing you. And yeah, just tell us a little bit about that idea.
Yeah, it's something I've been doing for over a year now. And for me, the jump off point was, I get lots of messages on Instagram or emails just saying, hey, I love my work. Is it possible I can assist you? Is it possible I can shadow you? Is it possible just for me to come on your set? And Instagram is like a terrible place to house communications, because you can't search. So if you left me a message about a month ago, if you left me a message about a month ago and then I have an opportunity to come up, I probably can't remember the person's name, and I can't. Yeah, so it all just became very fruitless, and then for anyone who was trying to hit me up on the gram about shadowing opportunities, sometimes if I do have an opportunity to come up, and I go on Instagram and say, hey, if anyone wants to shadow me, I think a lot of DBs do that as well. So I decided to create a Discord community/group, which was a way to communicate with multiple people. So, if you fill that form on my website, at some point I will send you an email to say, hey, fill in this form, here's a link to the Discord channel. You jump on the Discord channel. If I have a job coming up, I would say 70% of the time on those jobs, I will try and get someone on to shadow. So every time I get a job, the production come to me and ask for my crew details. One thing I always say to them is, hey, just to let you know, we'll be bringing on a DP shadow or DP mentee at no extra cost in production. I know most producers are happy with that. Sometimes I am sensitive to what kind of job. If it's a stressful job or if it's like an NDA job, then perhaps that's not the right job to get people on. So I'll clear that with production. Then I'll go in on the Discord channel and just say, hey, I've got this shoot coming up next week. Give as much of a breakdown as I can. If it's shooting digital, if it's shooting analog, if it's shooting in London, just to give people as much information. So for me, it was a way to provide people with access to be able to come on a set and see, actually, is this something I actually want to do? How does this thing work? I was shooting with the crew. Like, I remember the first time I had a first AC, a loader, a gaffer, and a spark, and the AD was like turnover. I didn't know what that stuff meant, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you have all these like film lingo that if you didn't grow up in the industry or come up in the industry or go to film school, you would have no clue what people are saying. Or it was something as banal as, I'm going 10-1. Like, what is a 10-1?
Right.
So I mean, I'm still learning some of these things. Yeah, okay, I'm a lot more well versed after so many years, but a lot of times I'm still learning these things. So for me, it was, how can I create a space for people to come in, see how this thing works, if it's something I want to do, if cinematography is what they actually want to do, because you might actually want to be a director. And sometimes I also have folks who are directors who just want to maybe brush up on their visual vocabulary, so they would want to shadow a DP and see how image making works from a cinematography perspective. So there are people who are a lot quieter and just like watch and have a look. There are people who make notes. There are people who ask questions. Then the other thing as well, from a mentoring perspective, is we have monthly group Zooms whereby there will be topics which some people might ask, hey, how do you work with camera movement, or how do you build lots, or how do you work with getting jobs? So I will collate all these questions, and at the end of the month, we'll have a Zoom which goes on for about, it's slated to go on for 2 hours, but most times it goes on for 3 hours. But everyone's excited to be there. So yeah, that's how it kind of works at the moment. My dream goal is, at some point, just to have, maybe even if it's once every quarter, be able to have like a big space and actually have more of like a hands-on session whereby you can come in and you can see lighting and blocking in practice. But again, like I said, I'm sure you need money and things to do all that stuff. But yeah, that's what I'd love to do. I think at the moment, I'll just like to concentrate on just helping out. Then at some point, if that opportunity comes up, then, I'll be looking into doing that.
Yeah, I mean, Olan, we should put you in touch with David and see about getting involved in a chapter of a Cinematography Salon UK, because David's been talking about doing similar things here, creating a space, doing meetups, like having a space where people can get together and do camera tests and lens tests and workshops and all sorts of stuff like that. Anyway, this is really cool, though, that you offer this and take the time out to do that. You have a very impressive body of commercial work and have worked with clients like Hennessy, Bumble, Nike, Calvin Klein, some big heavy hitters. brand-wise. Can you talk a little bit about your recent experience working on a campaign for Kia with director Solomon Lithhelm, who I think is a name that many people might know from the commercial world in the last 10 years, kind of maybe one of the leading commercial directors. So must have been a pretty cool opportunity to work with him. Can you talk about that experience a little bit?
Yeah, that was a very interesting experience. And, Solomon is someone who I have followed his work right from like his genesis, perhaps, when he was shooting on a Canon 7D and using Twixtor and all that stuff. So, I've watched him grow as a filmmaker, more so as a very visual filmmaker. He's incredible. So I'm sure I'm speaking for a lot of DPs when I go. I'm sure it's on most DPs' bucket list to kind of work with Solomon at some point. I was in Serbia. I think I spent about just under 3 weeks in Serbia, about 2.5 weeks. And it was quite a lengthy job. I had a call with him. Again, Solomon is a very busy guy. Like, he works a lot. We had a few calls while I was in London. I got to Serbia, and yeah, it was just interesting kind of like meeting him in flesh. Like, he's just so down to earth, and you would have thought someone with that cachet of like work and caliber of work would have so much ego about them. But he was just so humble. And one of the things he said to me was, I don't want this to be like perfectly like lit. I don't want it lit. So for me, it was like, what the hell? Like, the first time I got to work with Solomon, he told me I can't use lights. So, it took a while for me to kind of understand what he meant. We exchanged some references and some references of what he was looking for. And I think if you study Solomon's work, you will understand there is like texture and some patina to his work, which, stuff might be lit and practiced, but it just feels like it's found and it's genuine and sort of authentic. And I think for him, that's what he's looking for in his imagery. I also, when you look at the type of DPs he tends to work with, there is like this thing about the DPs. I mean, they don't do pretty work. I mean, it's more soulful and something quite it just feels like there is some thought and some patience that goes into that. You have to be there in practice and physically and mentally to capture those images. So from a production perspective, I got an email from his producer. He's like, we're shooting 35mm. We're shooting 120 cans of film. I've never shot more than 10 cans on any job.
Wow.
35mm.
Yeah.
But he's like, you've got 120. I was like, what the hell are we making? We're shooting like a 60-second ad.
Right.
120 cans is about 10 hours of footage. What's going on here? Because, it was like, have we going enough? I'm like, well, if we shoot in 60 seconds, trust me, I think
we have enough. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we have enough. Just to tell you, we actually shot 10 hours of footage. We shot it.
Of course. Yeah.
We shot on the film now. And that's because, for Solomon as a filmmaker, he doesn't shoot the boards, right? There was a shot of a baby in the board. There was literally one frame in the storyboard, which was a very close up on a baby, right? And Solomon was like, okay, what we're gonna do? I want to build a story around this baby, and can we get a mom and a dad and a room? But that's just giving you that context to say he's someone who creates a world and then finds a story, and then that's just to show you how he's able to create these powerful imagery. Because easily you could just go in there, shoot the board, shoot a close up of the baby, move on to the next setup, and then when you get into the edit, it just feels very stiff. I'm a DP. I've worked with tons of directors and tons of commercials, and you shoot the boards, you get the edit, you're like, this is just lacking life. So with the Kia job, it was about always creating an environment, lighting that environment, giving the actors some kind of objective, and then we go and capture the world. And I'm kind of going into what the technicality of the job, whereas you I think your original question was how did that come about?
Not at all. This is great. This is really pretty amazing to hear, because this is sort of an approach that seems like a rarity in the commercial space. Even just to have the resources and time to be able to do that, I think that ends up being what dictates shooting the boards versus, trying to create something that feels like it has humanity and feels lived in. Is that whenever I'm in a situation where we're just shooting the boards, it's because we're shooting a spot in 1 or 2 days. And so you don't have the time to do this kind of exploration. But Solomon, being the kind of filmmaker that he is, clearly curates his own job choices to set himself up to be able to create these situations, right? And also that approach is very familiar to me as well, because the film that I shot last year, we approached it very similarly, where it was all about creating an environment and filling that environment with people and with characters and creating something as immersive and lived in as possible, and then shooting as much as you can in order to, we would call it like sifting for gold, we would shoot 4 or 5 hours of footage a day and end up with, maybe 2 minutes or 2 or 3 minutes of footage from that day that were usable. But it's there was more footage that was usable, but those 2 or 3 minutes is what we were looking for. That's why we would shoot for 4 hours, because we're looking for gold. We're looking for that gold. We're looking for those moments of genuine humanity and emotion, and that where all the elements align and you get something really powerful and cinematic. And I think in order to do that, there's maybe other ways to do it, but I've found this method, as much as it can sometimes feel a little tedious and a little like, why are we shooting so much? It does work. Like, you do end up finding those gems, and that's what it's all about. Is just for that 2-second shot of the baby is like, but it's the best and most emotional and immersive 2 seconds of a baby shot you've ever seen in a commercial, right? And so it's worth it for that process. So that's really cool that you got a chance to do that on a commercial, no less. Like, it's just, that seems unheard of to me. I've never had that experience on a commercial personally.
Yeah, it's because that's his process as a filmmaker. And I recall, I think I either read or heard him in a podcast. He's the kind of filmmaker who will do X number of commercials. Let's say you do, 5 commercials, and after the 5, you have to do like a palette cleanse and go shoot some passion project. And I realized as a filmmaker, his passion projects are what gets him the kind of jobs he ends up doing. And it's something I always tell filmmakers, that you have to do those passion projects because, you could shoot 20 commercials back to back, get that money, and 20 out of 20 is not reelable because, you're just shooting the boards and the client messed up the edit. And it's very sad, going through a whole year and not feeling like you have fed your soul or fed your inner child or fed that creative in you to create something you're proud of. So just always create some time, go out there and shoot, just take a camera and go shoot some stuff. And I think that's what he's been able to do to create these films, whether it's his passion projects or his director's cut, that feel like his voice. And then that's what makes the client see maybe his passion project or his DC and go, man, I need this kind of voice. Because if all he put out was a client edit, I'm sure he wouldn't be the kind of filmmaker he is today. So I think it's worth just taking a leap out of that rule book or that school book as a creative, to always be in control of your voice.
There's so many elements of this commercial that speak to me, like the tree growing and stop motion time lapse, and the birthday candles kind of underexposed and then sort of fading up into exposure, just like serious, nostalgic, kind of beautiful stuff. I don't know, I just watching it like got me thinking a bit about kind of the creative market in the UK and in Europe versus the States. And, I feel like you're someone who's probably had experiences shooting a lot in the UK and Europe and shooting a lot probably in the States. And I was curious if you've seen any differences there and some of the creative that you're offered, and, if you feel like you're able to take more chances in certain markets, or just some of the trends that you see there and maybe how it pertained to some of these specific shots and moments that you're able to pull off in Kia.
Well, I've heard, the creative in the States tend to be more personality focused. So yeah, let's get like a A-lister, give them a couple of lines, say some stuff, drink a beer, hey, and then that's it. Creative in the States tends to be not as interesting or not as good or not as, creative. And, if you come to Europe or let's say the UK, the creative and commercials are a lot more creative or a lot more fun to shoot. Again, I don't know whether you would agree, but I can ascertain that when I look on Instagram and I look at some of the American DPs, I'm seeing them shoot some cool shit. I'm like, what do you mean? I would like to shoot. So I don't know whether that's just the 1% of like creatives in general.
Yeah, it's definitely that. No, it's definitely that. It's the exception to the rule. And look, I've never shot in Europe, but Peter and I have talked about this. It's like you could just see it from DP websites, like UK-based DPs. There's this DP that I saw a spot that he shot recently. His name is Mauro Chiarello. I might be mispronouncing it, but and it's this spot for QuickBooks with called Eggs.
Yeah,
and it has the chickens. It has these chickens, and you look at this and you're just like, nobody would ever approve of a commercial like this in America. Like, no creative agency, client side, anybody would make something like this. I mean, it is like a work of surrealist art that was made in the UK. And then you go to Mauro's website, and his whole website is like really cool, surreal, cinematic spots. And I think, your work also has this cinematic quality and this beauty to it. And that is rarer in the U.S. market for sure. It's not non-existent, but it's a little harder. And Hoyt van Hoytema tends to shoot those commercials. So, or Autumn Durald or all the great, the big narrative DPs,
right?
Which good for them, as they should. So
right. Europe also has a history of like interesting art and culture, so perhaps it stems from that.
One thing that I'm interested in asking you, Olan, is all of your camera tests that we had talked about earlier on in the show, I think can tend to be something very technical focused, talking about technique, lighting approach, technical elements that you're sort of figuring out how to resolve and how to accomplish. Your work has this very emotional, cinematic, filmic, like humanistic feeling to it. And I think that that's what comes across really, really strongly in your work. Can you talk a little bit about how you bridge the gap mentally between the technical and the emotional and the cinematic, like the soul of a project? Is that something that you're conscious of? Do you throw away technical stuff in order to focus on emotion? Does it kind of work together, like in concert for you? Do you find that it contradicts itself, or that you found a way to sort of meld, like being able to be present for a director like Solomon and other directors that you've worked with to create that kind of quality in your work? Or does the technical really support that stuff for you? Like, how do you strike that balance?
I think I'm someone who, I'd like to think I look for the North Star, or look for like a God look for the God in an image. But I think what makes me a good DP is someone who's very pragmatic, right? I'm someone who can flex. I can be on a film shoot with just one camera and no lights, and the next day I can be on a film shoot with tons of light. And it took me a while to be able to flex on that higher end because, like I said, I came from the wilderness just making shit out of like the blue. So when a director says, or the producer says, hey, send me your kit list, I don't know what to go on the kit list. Should I just put like an aperture, because I know I can light anything with an aperture and a mega boom. The technical way is for me to be able to translate something that becomes more emotional. I know what 25mm looks, but then when I hold a 25mm on my talent space, it's like, what do I feel? I just don't mean from how does the character look visually. For me, it's about, okay, what is this character going through in this scene? Do I want to be close up on them, or still have a sense of the mise-en-scene and the environment? And this is what I mean about, you understand the technical, but then it's about how you use the technical knowledge to then break the boundary and start creating art. And I think that's what that's what I tell a lot of younger DPs to focus on. Sometimes they get carried away with the gear, or let me buy like a red, or let me buy a 416, which is all great and good. But at some point, we need to start thinking about what's in front of the camera. So when I do my camera test, at no point do I don't shoot lens shots. I never look at work shot and go, oh, this lens looks really sharp, and oh, this lens has chromatic aberration, so I'm not going to use it. For me, it's about okay, at 2.8, is this lens usable? Okay, cool, it's usable. They are more feeling based, and which is why I always add some like music to them, so that when people watch it, they feel something. So for me, it's about how can I create emotions and feelings as something that feels authentic, and then bring them on to a job.
I think that, this hearing you talk about all these things kind of you have in your back pocket and choosing when to be pragmatic versus choosing when to be the artist, I feel like kind of segues into one of our final questions, which is your feature film, Rye Lane, I think really represents a big jump into the narrative world. And I just wanted to hear a bit about what it was like navigating the transition into working on such a big feature like that, and how some of these techniques were used on a feature like that, where I imagine the schedule was pretty tight and you had to make decisions very quickly and were probably answering to very large crews and everything.
Yeah, so Rye Lane was my first feature. Till today, I was still asking myself, how did I get to shoot it? Because by all metrics, I should not have shot that film. It's Rain, who's an amazing director, Rain Allen Miller. It was our debut film, and you would never get like a debut filmmaker shooting with a debut DP. The production designer, Anna Rhodes, an amazing production designer, was also a debut. She was making a debut on that film as well. Yeah, you just wouldn't have a debut director, debut production designer, and a debut DP. Shit just doesn't make sense. But how did I get the job? I did a commercial with Rain in 2020. We shot the Samsung commercial, which we actually shot on a Samsung phone. So it wasn't like the best job to showcase my skills to a director who's so renowned for her visual prowess to, you can do a job, shooting on the phone. She's like, I've got a feature. I'd love you to read. Hope you're available. The question I had to myself was, well, I don't get it. Are you offering me this job, or do I still have to interview for the job? Of course, I had to interview for the job. So I jumped on a Zoom call, I think on a Monday. She sent me a text on a Friday. And I remember reading the script and I thought, I have to shoot this film. I read a lot of scripts, and for me, shooting long form is a very big commitment, because, the commercials, why not keep shooting commercials? Rather than shooting long form that you don't love. There's no reason why you shoot a long form job you don't love. It doesn't make sense. So for me, I read it. I'm like, I have to shoot this. Jumped on a call, talked through my pitch to Rain. The producer was like, she had a poker face. I'm like, okay. But yeah, finished that call. Rain texted me straight away. She's like, I wanted to shoot it. Again, I was like, what does this mean? Does it mean I've got the job? Clearly not. So yeah, I had a chat with the producer. She had to do a due diligence because I was a debut filmmaker who'd shot nothing. I guess the concern is always, can you make the schedule? Are you fast? Are you slow? So yeah, I had to get sign off from all these three bodies. And over the week, okay, BFI said yes, BBC said yes, last was American, which was Searchlight, and finally they said yes. It wasn't much of a fight. Again, I don't know how much fighting Rain had to do, or I don't know. And like I said, biometrics, I should not have shot this film. But hey, the stars aligned and I got the job. To answer your question, it was a very delightful shoot, and I think a part of me feels like I was very lucky to have been on that job, because it was so joyful, and I feel the spirits that we had on set sifted away into the film itself. And I think you can tell by watching the film, the people who made that film must have had fun shooting that. For me, prep was all about how can I make sure I don't get fired on this job. So I just had to put my best foot forward, create documents, did lots of tests, send it to the producer. Here's my visual shot list. Here's how I think. I just had to show people, oh, this guy knows what he's doing. And bear in mind,
Right.
before I got signed as a DP, I was more on the narrative front. I was shooting monologues. I was shooting tons of short films. So I wasn't like new to visual storytelling or filmmaking. I was well versed in, how to make a film and how to make a film with very little. Like, I was shooting short films in one day. I was shooting 10 pages in one day. So I knew how to move quickly and tell the story how exactly it ought to be told. So yeah, for me, it was a very delightful experience. At no point did I fear I was going to be fired. And I think also credit to Rain, I think she was a big supporter. I mean, she was behind her crew. She believed in her crew. And I think it's massive when your director believes in you. It kind of just helps you do more. And she's someone who's I don't know how familiar you are with her work. She's very visual and knows precisely how she wants things framed. But, she wasn't prescriptive to me. For me, I feel that my job on that film was to be a prism through which Ren could shine her light through. And I say this in the most modest way. I think only someone like Rain and myself could have created what Riley ended up being. I think if someone else had shot it, it would be a totally different film. Not saying it would be a bad film, it just would be something else. And that's because, again, she just let me do my thing. I don't believe she would be like, would she say anything about the lighting? Because she would say, oh, Olan, I think you're the best DP in the world. I'm like, no, I'm not. Please stop. It's like when the mother says the baby is like beautiful and handsome. Like, you don't have to say that, right? I mean, she gave me a brilliant answer and says, yeah, I've shot with all these other DPs. And yes, they might be performing at this huge level and making all these big films, but it's a combination of all the things you bring, what you bring to the table, whether it's how you light, how you're on set, your temperament, how you handle your crew, how you talk to production, how you make me feel. And I think as DPs, your sole objective is not to make pretty images, right? Your objective as a DP is you're meant to be the right-hand person to your director. And I see myself as that to my director. You just have to be there for them. You need not to be adding to that stress. So when I look at my work, sometimes I don't think I make the best images, but I feel for the job I'm doing, I like to think I do the best I can to make it work. I have my producer's hat on. When the job comes, I'm not like, oh, I need to fly those lenses from Paris because I need them for this job. The lens is a lens. Like, tell me what lenses they have in Serbia. Okay, cool. Let's use those. And then, just put the weight behind things like production design, wardrobe. What does your director want? How can you work with your director to create a visual language? And I feel as filmmakers, you need to give yourself some constraints because that's how you make the best work. Because, if someone just said, hey, you're £100 million, go make a film you want to make, like, you're not going to make your best work that way. But your best work comes from adversity. And when I mean adversity, just like creating constraints. And when you don't have that, sit down with your director and just create like a rule book for yourself. And I think that's how you make work that has a visual vocabulary, whether that's a film or commercial. It's always good to try and find what the visual language of that piece is, and that's how you end up making work that feels like it says something. Because, DP sometimes we want to use the coolest stuff, want to use a technochrome, want to use the greatest Panavision, anamorphic lenses. And sometimes you just need to be in service to what your director wants to do.
Can't thank you enough for this. Seriously, this is just so inspiring. So much good stuff here. Can't wait for people to know about this mentorship you have going on Discord and all the great things that you're doing lately. And yeah, we look forward to hopefully continuing to chat.
Thanks for being on.
That was great. No, thanks. It's always great kind of like talking shop and having conversations about art and craft. I don't think DPs talk enough. I mean, I love talking to DPs, but most of them don't tend to expose themselves and just like talk in a raw form. I love it. So yeah, thanks for giving me the space to talk.
This episode of the Cinematography Salon podcast was produced by Peter Pascucci, Oren Sofer, and David Kruta, with original music by One Wave. We created this episode in partnership with the Cinematography Salon, and we would like to extend a special thanks to the salon community for sourcing topics for this episode. If you enjoyed listening to the episode, we encourage you to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on social media to stay up to date with our latest episodes and news. Thanks.